From the moment of Thutep's death by the banks of the Vitae, Khemri's power and influence had slipped like grains of sand from the weak hands of his successor. Rasetra's envoy had been the first to take his leave of Thutep's court, amid promises of eternal goodwill and support for Khemri's policies. Then the desert princes of Bagar had departed, followed by the envoys of Bel Aliad and Libaras. Within months, word reached Khemri that the dignitaries had taken up residence in Zandri instead, paying homage to Nekhomed's court. Slowly but surely, the locus of power was shifting away from the living cities for the first time in history. And for all his impassioned speeches and lofty ideals, Thutep seemed powerless to stop it. Even Khemri's noble houses had begun to lose their respect for the king's authority. None of the most powerful families chose to attend the royal summons to the Grand Assembly. At first there had been elaborate excuses and sincere regrets, but now they simply ignored the call of the Ptrakaf in favor of other pursuits. Many of the lesser houses had followed suit, and as the Grand Hierophant surveyed the bored-looking nobles gathered in the hall, he found that he recognized less than half of them. Not that Nagash had been a fixture in Thutep's court since his brother's ascension. For the last 2 years, he had spent nearly every night in the secret chambers within the Great Pyramid, seeking to master the sorcerous arts of the Druki. He'd spent months learning their degenerate tongue and hours listening to their hissing discourses on the nature of magic. Everything they told him confirmed his beliefs. The gods were not the wellsprings of the world's power. Magic permeated the land, invisible and omnipresent as the desert wind. Those that were sensitive to its touch could direct its flow, providing they had a keen mind and a potent will. So the Druki said, and yet, despite his every effort, Nagash felt nothing. The Grand Hierophant paused beside the rounded bulk of a marble column, his handsome face hidden in shadow. "A court full of jackals and mangy dogs," he observed, studying the crowd with a sour expression. "Who are these fools?" Khefru stepped up to his master's side and said, "Third and fourth sons, mostly, with no prospect of inheritance. Most of them are here because of public debts or other minor crimes. Your brother requires them to attend the Grand Assembly to help atone for their misdeeds." The young priest smirked. "I know many of them quite well." "Such as?" the Grand Hierophant asked, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Well," Khefru murmured. He nodded his head at a group of noblemen standing on the opposite side of the hall. "Take that pack of rats over there," he said. "You won't find a worse lot of drunkards and gamblers in all of Khemri. The tall one, in the middle, is named Arkan the Black. He'd cut his own mother's throat for a bag of coin." Nagash arched an eyebrow and said, "Arkan the Black? If we were close enough to see his teeth, you wouldn't have to ask," Khefru said, chuckling softly. "He chews Yusesh roots like a common fisherman, and he's got a smile like a smashed wine cup, since most of his ill-gotten coin on favors at the Saf's temple and borders that he has to pay double before any of the priestesses will go near him." "My brother makes a mockery out of all of us," Nagash hissed, shaking his head in disgust. His hands clenched angrily at the thought of his father's blasted corpse and the terrible power that had destroyed him. Power that remained stubbornly out of his reach. Bile burned at the back of his throat at the thought of all he could do with but a sliver of that awful strength. He turned to Khefru. "Any of these will do," he said with a disdainful sweep of his hand. "Promise whatever you must, but be discreet." "I know just the person, master," Khefru said, nodding quickly. "You may rely upon me." The expression on his face told Nagash that the young priest knew very well what would happen in the event that he failed. Nagash dismissed Khefru with a curt nod of his head, and the two parted ways, the young priest slipping silently into the rear of the crowd while the Grand Hierophant continued his journey through the shadows towards the great days. Lost in his covetous reverie, Nagash failed to notice the wide-robed figure waiting in his path until he was nearly on top of her. She wore the ceremonial vestments of the matron of Ptra, her stout figure entirely concealed, except for her strong, wrinkled hands, which were clasped tightly at her waist. Her face was concealed behind a gold mask that glimmered faintly in the reflected light of the court's oil lamps. The matron bowed deeply at Nagash's approach. "The blessings of the Great Father be upon you, Holy One," she said in a deep voice. The matron spoke with a Lamian's sing-song accent. Nagash scowled at the woman. "I require no blessings from you, matron," he replied curtly. The answer seemed to amuse the matron. "Be that as it may," she said, "I stand before you on behalf of the Queen. Nehekhara wishes to speak with you." "Indeed," Nagash murmured, his handsome face betraying a hint of surprise. "This is an unexpected honor. When am I to meet with her?" "Now, if it please you," the matron answered, gesturing into the darkness beyond the dais. "She waits in the antechamber, beyond the great hall. Shall I escort you there?" Nagash let out a snort. "I was born in these halls, woman. I can find my own way," he said, and left the matron bowing awkwardly in his wake as he strode swiftly off into the gloom. His dark eyes were pensive as he contemplated the reason for this surprise summons. The Daughter of the Sun did not, as a rule, hold private audience with anyone save the king. Nagash approached the queen, taking note of the half a dozen matrons resting upon their knees at a discreet distance on the far side of the room. He bowed smoothly before the Daughter of the Sun. "You summoned me, Holy One." "The blessings of the Great Father be upon you, Grand Hierophant," Nehekhara replied, in a voice as dark and rich as honey. She spoke with the musical accent of the Lamians, and her every movement was graceful and poised. The queen indicated a divan to her right. "Please, sit. Would you care for wine, or perhaps some food?" "I do not partake of wine," Nagash said. "It clouds the senses and corrupts the mind, and I can abide neither." The Grand Hierophant settled on the edge of the divan. "But I thank you, nonetheless." Across the room, the matrons shifted uncomfortably, but the queen was unruffled. "My husband was speaking of you the other day," she began. "He has seen very little of you since your great father's death." Nagash shrugged. "My brother and I have never been close," he said, "and my duties with the cult demand much of my time." His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. He had been careful to conceal his trips to the Great Pyramid these last couple of years. Was it possible Thutep was spying on him? "I certainly understand the demand that gods and men place upon the priesthood," the queen said with a knowing look. "And as the Grand Hierophant of Khemri's mortuary cult, your influence extends beyond the living city to lich priests all across Nehekhara. Some might even say your power rivals that of the heretic council in Mahra." Nagash smiled faintly. "All men die, Holy One," he said. "That alone is the source of our influence." He waved his hands dismissively. "The great mysteries of life and death occupy my interest. I have no time for the petty politics of the priesthood." Once more, a stir went through the silent matrons. Nehekhara studied the Grand Hierophant for a moment, resting her chin on the tips of her fingers, and said, "But the kings of Nehekhara rely upon priests for their insight and wisdom, do they not?" "Some more than others," Nagash observed. "The priest-kings of Lamia are notably indifferent to the demands of their holy men, for example." "That depends upon the advice, I think," the queen countered, "and its source." Nagash folded his arms across his chest and regarded Nehekhara coolly. "And what advice would you have me give, Holy One?" The Daughter of the Sun smiled at him. "Your brother has a bold vision for the Blessed Land," she said. "Your father brought an era of peace and prosperity to Nehekhara. Thutep wants to build upon that and unify the land once more." Nagash arched an eyebrow at the queen. "He would restore Setra's empire?" "Not an empire," Nehekhara said. "A confederation of equals, bound by ties of trade and mutual self-interest." Her eyes glittered with passion. "We are all one people, Grand Hierophant, bound to the gods in the covenant of faith. The Blessed Land belongs to all of us. Setra's empire only hinted at the glories we could achieve once our rivalries were put aside." The Grand Hierophant let out a derisive snort.
You would have the people of Khemri believe that they are the equal of those flea-bitten horse thieves in Bagar? It is outrageous.
Neferim straightened in her seat, and her beautiful face took on a haughty cast. They are equal, she said, and both cities could profit from such an understanding. What has Nehekhara gained from centuries of warfare except stagnation and death?
Death is the way of the world, Nagash said. Why should a man trade for something when he can seize it instead?
The Grand Hierophant rose to his feet.
Thutep understood this. The priest-kings of Nehekhara yielded to his authority because he was a great general and they feared the might of his army.
And look at how long his achievements lasted after his death, Neferim answered. Khemri's court is all but emptied. Fear can compel men, but it cannot bind them together for long.
Not without constant reinforcement,
Nagash hissed.
Thutep surrendered what authority Khemri possessed when he chose not to seek revenge against Zandri for the death of our father.
He gestured sharply into the direction of the court.
The great houses disdain him, and he does nothing. At this point, I would not be surprised if more than one of them was plotting against him. How does he expect to forge a grand confederation of kings when he cannot manage his own court?
The queen stiffened. And what would you have him do?
What I wish is not relevant,
Nagash snapped.
If Thutep hopes to rule over Khemri, he must spill his share of blood. Heads must roll, both here and abroad. This is how cities grow wealthy and powerful, not because they went to their neighbors and begged for aid.
Neferim's jaw tightened fractionally at Nagash's contemptuous tone, but her voice was steady as she spoke. I can't deny that my husband's vision grows harder to achieve with each passing day, she said. We are not blind to Zandri's ambitions, Grand Hierophant. I hoped that you would be persuaded to intervene on your brother's behalf. If the other cities would agree to help form a united front against Nehekhara,
to what end? So they could throw away their swords and become a nation of merchants?
Nagash's lip curled in distaste.
And you thought I would lend my voice to such foolishness? You insult me, Holy One.
Neferim's face grew still. Then I regret having given offense, she said neutrally. I shall take up no more of your time, Grand Hierophant. My husband had spoken to me at length of your brilliance, and I know what it is like to put aside ambition and serve the needs of a temple. I had hoped to give you a role in shaping the future of Khemri. The Grand Hierophant bowed deeply to the queen.
For me to shape the future of Khemri, I would require a crown, he said coldly. For now, that privilege belongs to the priest-king of Zandri.
Nagash turned on his heel and took his leave of the queen. The startled whispers of the matrons followed after him as he returned to the shadows of Cetra's court. While he had been with Neferim, the Grand Assembly had concluded, and the hall buzzed with a murmur of voices as the young nobles of the city hurried out into the sunlit afternoon in search of better entertainment. A handful of nervous young mothers clutched their babies at the foot of the great dais, awaiting the blessing of the Daughter of the Sun. Thutep was already gone, having exited the court through Naru's door at the rear of the chamber. The great dais was deserted. Nagash paused nearby. A crown, he murmured thoughtfully, looking up at Cetra's throne. Unnoticed by the dwindling crowd, Nagash climbed the stone steps and stood beside the ancient chair. He rested his hand on the arm of the throne and contemplated the backs of the milling nobles, his eyes full of dark and terrible thoughts.